Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started and kind of let the other folks start trickling in. So thank you for joining us on a sunny Friday evening. Maybe we did it last Friday, would have been better when the weather wasn't as nice, but it's an exciting time. We got crabbing coming up next weekend for a good chunk of Puget Sound. And then as we move up north, we start getting some of the other seasons opening up. My name is Jason Morgan. I'm the Marine Projects Manager for the Northwest Straits Foundation. Quick little bit about our organization. If you don't know who we are a nonprofit. Our mission is to protect and restore the marine resources of the Puget Sound region. We do that through restoration projects, water quality projects, marine debris cleanup, such as derelict fishing gear, and a whole lot more. One of the things we're focused on is ensuring sustainable fisheries for all. So one thing about crabbing, if you want to go to our Catch More Crab page, that's catchmorecrab.org. When you go there, you can find a lot of things, videos and tips and tricks to learn more about crabbing. I also point out we are a nonprofit. So if you would like to contribute to our work and what we do, up at the Make a Gift button up there, or the Donate on the right-hand side button, you are able to donate to our cause. When you're on the website, if you scroll down, you'll find different videos. You'll find different tips and tricks for setting up your crab pot and deploying it correctly. And down on the bottom there, these are links to different Android, iPhone, and different web apps to help you out with tides and currents and places to crab, seasons, regulations, and stuff like that. Today, we are only using the Q&A function for you listeners to be able to participate. We have a whole lot of people, so we can't manage a lot of people in the chat, so the chat function is turned off. We also are not going to be using the raise hand feature. So if you have any questions, please type it in that question and answer function on the bottom. We will answer it either through typing back the answers, or most of the answers we'll answer live. And at the end of the session is when we'll ask all the questions. So I'll be feeding the questions to our presenters from Fish and Wildlife, and they will answer them in real time for you. Our speakers today are Don Velasquez and Daniel Sund with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. We will begin with Don presenting on Puget Sound crab management. I'm sorry, Daniel. And Daniel, if you can go ahead and start sharing your screen now. And while Daniel is getting set up, sharing his screen and his video, I'll stop my share. Daniel is the Commercial Crustacean Fishery Manager for Puget Sound for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. He moved to Port Townsend a few years ago from the Oregon coast, where he helped manage the coastal crab fishery for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. He has a Master's of Science in Marine Resource Management from Oregon State University. All right, that looks good, Daniel. You got it.
Hi, everyone. As Jason mentioned, my name is Daniel Sund. I'm happy to talk to you today about crab management in Puget Sound. The talk that Don and I are going to give will talk about how harvest, who are the harvest groups, what are the allocations, some of the timing, what are the management principles for Dungeness and red rock crab, go into some of the recreational rules, talk and demonstrate some different crab gear, as well as the best practices in using it, and give you a little bit of demonstration on how to set that gear up. With that, we have a lot of material to cover and a little bit limited on time. So if you have any questions specific to red rock crab, because that's one of our I guess, most people are here for Dungeness crab. If you have questions about red rock, we'll ask you to focus them at the end, and we've removed a little bit of the material regarding that species. For the crab fisheries in Puget Sound, we do manage both Dungeness and red rock kind of at the same time. The red rock fishery is incidental to the Dungeness crab fishery, and our seasons are structured more around Dungeness crab.
Don Velasquez here. I want to talk a little bit about the recreational community that harvests crab. Participation requires a Puget Sound Dungeness crab endorsement. That's only for Puget Sound. There's about 220,000 endorsements sold per year in recent years. They allow you to harvest Dungeness crab in Puget Sound, and with that endorsement, you also get at least a summer catch record card or a catch record card. If you want to harvest in winter as well, you may also pick up a winter catch record card. There's 2 separate seasons and reporting periods. And like salmon, you're required to record your catch on the catch record card. immediately in pen, and then at the end of the appropriate season, you have to submit a report by 1 month after that season ends, by the date issued on the card.
Yeah. I'm the commercial crustacean fishery manager. So within Puget Sound, there are two state managed fisheries. One is the recreational crab fishery, which Don here manages. The other is the commercial fishery. The commercial fishery is a limited entry fishery, meaning not anyone can pick up and go fish. It has a limited number of licenses. For Puget Sound, that is 248 licenses. Each of those licenses grants the license holder to use up to 100 pots, but we typically limit the number of pots that commercial fishers can use to less than 40 pots per license in a given year. And that tends to vary by our management areas, which we'll talk a little bit about as we move forward. In contrast to the recreational fishery, where we have you guys fill out a catch record card and you submit those catch tallies to us at the end of the season, all commercial catch for both the state and the tribes must be recorded on a fish receiving ticket. This is very similar to a receipt, and they have to do that after each day that they sell catch. So we get those information basically in real time from the commercial fishery. The season for the commercial fishery runs from October 1st through April 15th. And this timing is very purposeful so that the recreational fishery goes first out of the two state managed fisheries. Puget Sound is split up into a number of different regions. These might look similar to the marine areas that you have, but they are slightly different. Just as a nature of where our quota and co-manager areas of harvest and interest are. These are the areas with which we have discrete quotas set within Puget Sound. These do align roughly with our recreational marine areas. Here on the left, you can see the management regions that I talked about before, and on the right you can see the recreational marine areas. They're separate, but they do overlap. So for regions 1, 2 east, 2 west, and 3, these are akin to marine areas 7, 8182, 9, and 4, 5, and 6 respectively. These are the only areas where there's a commercial fishery managed by the state. Yes. In Puget Sound. For regions 4, 5, 6, and 7, or marine areas 10, 12, and 11 and 13, those are recreational only areas. The state does not have a commercial fishery in those areas. That does not to say that there might not be tribal commercial fisheries in those areas. At any point in the year, this is roughly when harvest may be happening within Puget Sound. So for this upcoming year, starting in upcoming season, starting in April this year and running through April next year, at any point in Puget Sound, there may be a tribal fishery popping off. That's in contrast to our recreational fisheries, which are prescribed in policy and happen from July 1st through Labor Day for the summer season, and then from October 1st through December 31st in our commission policy, which governs the season structure that we as managers have to use for the recreational and state commercial fisheries. Within that same state policy, it tells us the days of the week that we have to fish for the base season. That's Thursday through Monday, with Tuesday and Wednesday being closed days. So all gear has to be removed out of the water on those days. For the tribal fishery, why it's happening at any point of time during the year, that can be for a number of different reasons. The tribes are much more able to manage their fisheries to hit economic conditions that are more favorable for them. Their fisheries are typically managed to fish for a discrete period of time, like 2, 3, 4 days or a week or 2, particularly in the summer. And they do that to not flood the market and maintain the highest ex-vessel value for their fishers and how they manage their resource. On the state commercial side, we have a derby style fishery where we open it and then it's closed once it's done. We don't, as a department, we don't manage to those same economic price points that the treaty tribes do. Another reason why their schedule is more variable than ours is that they're juggling multiple fisheries at the same time. So they're trying to maximize the opportunity for their tribal members to participate in gooey duck and crab and salmon and sea cucumber and all of these different fisheries, which have different timings and go off in different areas. And it's quite a coordination task that they're undertaking. For the resource that we have in Puget Sound in 1994, the treaty tribe's rights to half of the shellfish resource in Puget Sound was reaffirmed by the Supreme Court. So due to a court order, their right to 50% of all shellfish in Puget Sound was reaffirmed. So to achieve that sharing of 50% of a resource, we use a quota system in Puget Sound. Our quota is a sharing mechanism. It's not necessarily responsive to the abundance that is out there in any given year. It lets us achieve that 50-50 sharing and has small changes within a given year to accommodate changes in abundance. So for our 50-50 share, Don and I here, we manage the state's half of that 50-50. So for the state's 50%, the WDFW commission policy, it's granted a recreational priority to that resource. Whatever the recreational fishery doesn't take after its summer season and been planning for the entirety of the winter seasons that are prescribed in that policy, that is then used to set the state commercial targets. In some years, it's been 50-50 between the state commercial and the state recreational. In some years, the state commercial has taken more. And that's particularly true as some of our areas in the South Puget Sound that have been recreational only have closed due to conservation concerns. Here's a plot showing the total number of pounds landed within the state fisheries in Puget Sound from 1993 to 2021. In the light blue is the commercial fishery landings, and in the gray is the recreational. So throughout the entire length of this time series, you can see quite a few things different going on. In 1994, I mentioned that was when the resource started to be split 50-50 with our treaty tribes. So you can start seeing some of the impacts of that harvest on this plot. It's going to be much more apparent in another one I'll show in just a moment. In 2010, the WDFW Commission opened up and then issued a new crab policy for the Puget Sound crab fishery. And that was implemented in 2011. And starting in that 2011 season, you can see that the amount of harvest that occurred by the recreational fishery jumped up pretty significantly because of that prioritization that the recreational fishery was given. Following the implementation of that policy, we had a number of conservation closures in recreational only areas in South Sound that then removed some of that harvest that the recreational fleet was having in those south areas, and ended up pushing more of the harvest coming from the commercial sector. This is a plot of the state and tribal fisheries. So recreational catch and state commercial catch here are added together. And then this shows the total harvest over those timeframes. This better shows the fishery from 1991 to 1994, which was essentially only a state managed fishery. And then that transition when the treaty tribes started fishing and the Puget Sound crab resource as a whole started to get fully capitalized. And that harvest went from 2 to 3 million up to 12 million pounds per year in some years. one pattern that you can see in both of the plots that I just showed is some, increases or some variance between years in the total amount of harvest. Some years have more crabs, some years have less, and our catch shows that. So crab fisheries, kind of Puget or West Coast wide, and into Alaska, they're managed using a framework that we call the 3S management framework. The 3 S's stand for size, sex, and season. We don't have a lot of in-season information about the abundance or change in the amount of crab that are out there in the wild. What we do is we restrict the harvest of crab for all parties to a minimum size. We limit the harvest to only male crab, which gives females an opportunity to reproduce without harvest pressure. And then we structure our seasons to the best of our ability to minimize interactions with softshell crab or during the molt periods. So as I mentioned, we have a size limit. There is some variation on that size limit depending on where you're harvesting. In Puget Sound, for everybody and that fishes Dungeness crab, recreational, state, commercial, treaty tribes, it is 6 1/4 inches. Every crab has to be 6 1/4 inches. On the Washington coast, to give the recreational user group a little bit more of a chance of harvesting and competing with the large commercial fisheries out there, it's 6 inches. And then the Columbia River, because that is co-managed with Oregon, and Oregon has a recreational size limit of 5 3/4. It's 5 3/4 in the Columbia River. The size for crab is measured from the inside of the 2 outermost points, not including those points. And we'll demonstrate this once we turn our video on how to measure the cell, but you really do need to use a crab gauge rather than something that is reaching across the surface of that shell to measure them. As I mentioned before, this is a sex selective fishery. We only retain male crab that are of that legal size. All female crab have to be released immediately and can't be retained. This is a female crab over here on the right. If you compare the male crab and the female crab has a much broader abdominal flap, and then the male on the left, that has a much narrower one. It looks like a tower or a lighthouse or a finger. All of those have been descriptions that we've heard. This bottom crab, this crab on the bottom is actually a female crab bearing eggs. The last S of the 3S management framework is season. So our recreational seasons are prescribed in policy for the summer season, but they're actually informed by when roughly the molting period is for Dungeness crab. And our fishery, it's our intention to manage our fishery to avoid that molting period. Recently molted crab, they have a very soft shell. When crab molt, they actually shed all of their hard parts, step out of their shell, and have a very parchment-like new cuticle that they will grow into. And the way that they grow, unlike us, where we continuously grow up with little increments, the crab grows stepwise. So they'll grow into their shell, step out of their shell into a bigger one, and then inflate that shell with water up until their new size. And then they will grow their muscle tissue internally to fill that shell. And when they're no longer fit, they'll molt again. Freshly molted crab, they tend to have a lower meat yield because that shell is filled with water. And then they've also just gone through this very intense physiological process of shedding their shell. So they have lower meat quality in addition to having less meat. And they're also very susceptible to handling. So that's why we try and structure our fisheries to avoid them.
This is the recreational crab seasons that were announced just recently on June 15th. The marine areas in the column toward the middle of the screen are those marine areas in your sport pamphlet. And as you can see, each one of those marine areas or portion of marine areas has a different summer season dates and days of the week open. Marine areas 7 south and 7 north, they're in the green, the northern part of the map there. They tend to open later in the season because of avoiding the molting legal size male crab, as Daniel just mentioned. But again, all those seasons are Thursday through Monday only, Tuesdays and Wednesdays closed. We do have more restrictive seasons for marine areas 10 and 11. That's 10 is the yellow and 11 is sort of a, I guess it's a puke green color down below the yellow and 10. Those two areas have a smaller quota. And therefore we have shorter seasons, only 2 days a week for the summer period, Sundays and Mondays only. Just a note here, any of those days that, the continuous days of the week that are open, you are allowed to leave your crab pots out overnight on those days only. But whenever the crab fishery is closed, all gear must be out of the water on those closed days. So for example, marine areas 10 and 11, you will have to have your gear out of the water from Tuesday through Saturday. We do have a couple areas to the south that there is no Dungeness crab season, no crab season scheduled, and it's because the Dungeness population is struggling in Hood Canal. That's Marine Area 12 south of Ayoc Point, and Marine Area 13. And we continue to test fish and monitor those areas. And if that situation changes, then we'll react with management, both on the state and tribal side, to open seasons there. Some of the recreational rules for Dungeness crab, these are conservation rules. Males only, like Daniel mentioned, 6 1/4 inch minimum size limit in Puget Sound. And to verify that we're harvesting 6 1/4 inch crab, recreational harvesters must retain the back shells to prove compliance, even when they're in the field. If enforcement comes upon you, you have to be able to prove that you're harvesting legal size crab. A daily limit of 5, you must release soft shell crab, and we'll show you how to determine what crab are soft shell in this presentation. There's a requirement for a biodegradable device, or escape cord as it's called, on all traps. This is designed to rot away and allow crab that are in a lost trap to eventually escape, prevent ghost fishing mortality in that regard. Pots must have a minimum mesh size of 1.5 inches, and it has to have 2 4 1/4 inch escape rings in the upper half of the pot. Those escape rings are an important feature because they allow the pot to act basically as a feeding station for anything that's not a legal size male, and allow the smaller males and females to escape. And it's illegal to keep the claws only, whether it be Dungeness or red rock crab. That is an illegal in Puget Sound. There are some fisheries on the East Coast that allow that for some species. Some important differences for red rock crab. Again, you can keep male or female red rock that are above the minimum 5-inch size. And there's a daily limit of 6 on the red rock crab. Now, going on to the rules for an orderly fishery, the next set of rules for Dungeness crab in Puget Sound, you must have a shellfish license or combination license. You also, if you're going to intend to keep Dungeness crab, you have to have a crab endorsement and catch record card, as we mentioned earlier. You're required to record each crab you keep immediately, just like you would salmon. And you're required to report your catch by the deadline for the summer and winter catch record cards. I'll go into how the buoys should be set up and labeled in a slide to come. Buoy lines must not float on the surface. The obvious reason for that is buoy lines that float on the surface get struck by boats, hang up on trees, and all the other good stuff that contributes to trap loss. And you're only allowed 2 units of gear per person per day. And I will define what a unit of gear is in another slide. For red rock crab, the main differences are highlighted in yellow. You don't need a crab endorsement or catch record card. You're not required to record your crab, and you're not required to report your catch.
One important note about a red rock crab fishery is that it's incidental to Dungeness crab. Red rock crab is only open when the Dungeness crab fishery is open. That's why we don't have a targeted red rock fishery in some place like South Sound. It requires pretty substantial changes to how we manage and account for our catch to do something like that.
Yes. This is just an example of the catch record card. Again, you have to have a license, the catch record card. You use the empty line on the card to record the number of crab that you've retained, marine area that they were harvested, and the date. This year, we will have some additional WDFW staff at different launch ramps and marinas to collect data on how people are recording their crab on their CRCs and that compliance, and also to collect data on size and weight. So if you're out crabbing this year, say hi to any of our staff that'll be there, and they're going to be collecting data that's important to managing this fishery. The reporting requirements, again, the deadlines for reporting are labeled on each CRC. You'll have a mail-in option to report, or you can also do it online. If you're going to do the online, you have to set up a password. That's part of the system, and that's required because of a security issue we had back in 2016. Either way, you can report your catch by the deadline. And if you have problems reporting your catch, please contact one of us, and we can help you get that information into the system. This is just to show a number of crab harvested per crabber, and to remind everyone that even if you did not catch any crab and you were issued a CRC, you're required to report that, either 0 or whatever number you caught. And that information is important to us for management. You'll be penalized a $10 fee if you don't. Moving on to the crab gear and best practices. There's a lot of different legal ways to harvest crab. We're going to focus in this presentation a lot on the lower right, the crab pots, particularly the recreational style that you see on the lower right. However, you can use dip nets, you can use star traps, that's in the top center. You can use commercial style pots top right, dip rakes, or even castable devices like the crab hawk, which is in the lower center. These attach to a fishing line, people can cast them out and capture crab that way. Each one of those is considered a unit of gear. So let's focus more on the crab pots. Some of the requirements for a crab pot are a properly marked name with full name and mailing address. I'll show you that in the demonstration. The crab buoys must be red and white, and actually, according to WAC, all crab buoys must be red and white. You have to use sinking line or add weight to any buoyant line so that none floats on the surface of the water. It is recommended to have about 25 to 30% more line in most instances to account for the tide change and where the pot is being set. Again, I mentioned the 2 escape rings 4¼ inch in diameter. That makes that pot more of a selective fishing environment for only the legal size males. The biodegradable device is designed to rot away in case your trap is lost. Minimum mesh size of crab traps is 1.5 inches. That is by rule. And there is an ultimate size limit on the size of the trap, thank God. A total trap volume of 13 cubic feet or less. The other things that are recommended for traps, and we'll get into this, is adding weight to your trap, shown in the diagram as the bricks. Rugged bait containers, that's to keep the bait contained and in the center of your trap where the crab have to come through the doors, the tunnels to access the bait. Flags and staffs on buoys are optional. They're often used to identify your trap in a sea of other red and white buoys, and makes retrieving your buoy a little bit easier from certain types of vessels. And we'll show you examples of that. WDFW works with enforcement to basically go out on those closed days of the week, Tuesdays and Wednesdays in most areas, and retrieve all the traps that are either illegally fishing or have been lost during the course of that fishing period. And it's just some examples of the volume and kind of gear that is being picked up on those days. Why do traps get lost? There's a variety of reasons. Some of these involve user error or can be mitigated by the way you set up your gear. Others are just bad luck, to be quite honest. Traps can be set too deep. Sediment deposition prevents retrieval, often near river mouths or on the coast. Buoys and lines can be struck by vessels, barges, logs, and rafts. Often that's with a properly weighted line, and it could be an inattentive boat operator. Buoys and lines can tangle in woody debris or kelp, frequently near river mouths. Large woody debris, doesn't matter if it's a recreational or commercial pot, it can get wrapped up on that tree and get pulled off station. Owners forget where they place them. We have GPS units now I encourage many people to just use their GPS and mark their gear when they set it. Tidal currents can pull buoys down or drag traps away. This is one where how you set your trap up really influences whether that actually happens. Again, you could tie a bad knot, line connections fail, you could snag on an underwater boulder. Believe it or not, ice flows in places where fresh water accumulates in the winter can be a problem with crab traps, and malicious sabotage or cutting off buoys. It does happen. This is just a summary of the number of traps by year that WDFW sweeps on the closed fishing days retrieve from the water. And this is from Puget Sound only. And you can see in recent years we're in the neighborhood of 1,300 to 1,600 actual traps that are removed during the course of summer. Most of these traps are, as of late, are what we call recreational owner unknown. By owner unknown, we are adhering strictly to the buoy marking requirements, meaning you have to have your full name and address, and it has to be legible. If that isn't happening, then it's going to be recreational owner unknown. Very small percentage of these traps are recreational owner identifiable, meaning we can read everything and everything's there. And very small percentages of these traps recovered are state commercial or treaty commercial traps, as influenced or indicated in the top of the graphs on the bars. Again, looking at those same numbers by gear type and just the recreational component of the recoveries, most of these traps are the square light folding traps. You can see in most of these years, it's represented by the blue. A very few are commercial style round, and then there's a variety of other trap designs that aren't square or round that comprise the gray portion of each year's recoveries. What are the two main problems we see with this recovered gear? Number one is unweighted traps. Weighted means that the trap had substantial weight in its construction, or they actually added weight to the design. When we look at the stuff that's been recovered on closed days, about 63-64% as of late has no significant weight in the design of the trap, or doesn't have any weight added. And that is a problem, and it does contribute to that loss of those traps. The other one that sort of surprised me and surprised Jason as well is how much of this gear has the buoys attached incorrectly or is using an illegal buoy. And when you take into account all the errors you can make with buoy attachment, about 75 to 80% of the gear that we pick up on closed days has a buoy attachment issue or using the buoys incorrectly. And I'll show you a photo of what that means. The next slide shows a couple of different buoy arrangements that we've encountered when we retrieve closed season pots. The photo on the left shows an illegal buoy. There's an open cell foam flat slab blue thing attached on that pot on the lower side. That's illegal. And then the red and white buoy attached above that is also attached so that it's upside down, meaning if the trap's at the bottom of the photograph, this is set up to maximize drag in the current, catch more kelp, drag the pot off station. This is set up to lose someone's gear, especially if it's attached to an unweighted trap. The center photo also is not ideal. You're using an illegal buoy because empty milk jugs are, that's I believe canola oil or something in that photograph. Empty jugs are not allowed expressly by WAC. And if the buoys are tied on sideways, they're going to not minimize drag. They're going to increase the drag and pull your trap off station. And on the far right, there's a high flyer setup or a pole and staff setup. Again, the buoy is flat side down to where the pot would be attached. That maximizes drag. It also catches kelp and would result in a trap being more likely to be lost. So one of the other things that we want to consider when we're setting up our gear is how do we maximize escapement from the lost traps? Clearly, there's escape cord required, and I'll go into that requirement when we get into the demonstration a little bit. Natural fibers for escape cord are allowed. These are the ones that will dissolve or rot in time. Cotton is probably the most available and commonly used. Use a smaller cord than what is actually legal. I think thread size 120 is the legal requirement, but you can use smaller natural cords, and it would allow crab to escape in a shorter time frame. The most effective way of using escape cord is attaching an entire side of the trap up with 3 loops. Also very effective is tying in the escape ring with escape cord. We'll show you. Least effective is escape cord on a top door with a lip at the edge. We'll show you that as well. This is an example of escape cord holding in an escape ring. When that cotton cord in white rots, then the ring falls down. The crab will very easily escape through that opening. The next photo just shows you that if that escape ring is in the top corner of a trap, it's also very effective, and crabs are able to negotiate that and climb out. On the right side of this photo is a side of the trap that was held open with escape cord, and again, the crab can effectively get out of that trap. These are the traps that are a little bit more problematic, and the reason we'll show you in the demonstration why these traps may require like a bungee cord addition to make sure that crab can get out of this trap if it's lost. And I think we're here for any questions that we can answer at this point before the video demonstration.
Okay, thanks, guys. I got a couple questions here for you. First question is, given the population explosion up and down Puget Sound, how has that impacted the pressure on crab populations?
Yeah, Daniel, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, Puget Sound with its fisheries is in a pretty unique place. I can't think of another place in the world where a recreational fishery can outpace or be on par with a commercial fishery in terms of the amount of harvest that fishery has. And in Puget Sound, that is the case. It's feasible, and it has happened that the recreational fishery in areas with a 1 million pound quota has taken the entire quota or more. Because Puget Sound is a inland sea with next to major metropolitan areas with ready access via small boats, and because Washington has such a strong fishing culture and outdoor culture, we've definitely seen, a large increase in participation in our recreational fisheries. When we manage a fishery like a commercial fishery, we tamp down on effort by limiting the number of licenses that we sell. With a recreational fishery, we don't do that. It's open access. The way that we limit our harvest and the way that we limit interaction with the resources to reduce the days that it's open, change our bag limits, or put some other restrictive measure in place.
Yeah, and to highlight one thing that Daniel hinted at is we have a lot of access to the water recreationally. We have some of the largest marinas and ramp facilities. I'm thinking of Everett in particular, to access the water. That's a big factor. And then commercially, quite honestly, the ex-vessel price paid to the fishermen for Dungeness crab has grown over the last couple decades, and so that also tends to increase the harvest pressure on the commercial side as well.
Yeah.
Another question, kind of in that same topic area. Somebody said in Area 7, we used to be able to fish year round. We could do rings from October to April and pots from April to October. With derelict pots being such a big issue, why not go to year-round fishery with rings only and get rid of trapping pots altogether so there are no derelict pots?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I've heard that suggestion before. One thing about ring nets that is different from pots is because there are less stringent requirements on ring nets, smaller mesh allowed, you are going to be handling potentially more of the population, not just the legal size males. And I think that is distasteful, to a lot of the crab fishery resource managers, that ring nets are not very selective, and crab that are captured in a ring net have a high likelihood of being handled much more than in a pot that's more selective with the 4 1/4 inch escape rings. The other issue that's the primary issue, I believe, with a ringnet only fishery. But again, the ringnets are designed to not trap and hold crab. So I guess that would be a benefit of that idea. And quite honestly, neither the state or the tribes have pursued that idea for managing full-scale fisheries.
Yeah, in terms of the fishery structure that we have with the summer season and the winter season, 5 days a week, then 7 days a week, respectfully, that is outlined in commission policy. We're constrained in terms of what the seasons we can offer based on that commission policy. So moving to a year-round fishery, just with the current policy that we have, that's not something that can be done. With respect to like having a year-round fishery, that certainly may have been the case in the past, particularly in a period of time before the fishery was co-managed and before there was such a large population, vying for access to the resource. I would doubt that even if we move forward with having extended seasons and, moving away from a 5-day-a-week season, if our policy were to change, that we would have a year-round fishery simply for the factors that we had talked about before around molting and handling soft shell crab or females, or times when the females are in the clutch with eggs. We would want to minimize the interaction from a fishery management perspective with the resource when it's at its most vulnerable times. But I mean, Don said it, and it's a good idea in terms of minimizing the impacts of lost gear, and kind of reducing the footprint of the fishery for people leaving pots out for extended periods of time, because ringnets, they're really an active fishing measure. You have to check them every 15 or 20 minutes in order to get your catch.
And we have an example of a ringnet here that we can show you for people who don't know what a ringnet is. So.
Yeah.
Cool. I got a couple more questions for you guys and then one for me. So you guys first, and this is a good one that everybody should know. The question is, can I have a buoy that is not red and white on the line as long as there is one that is red and white? Common misconception.
Yes, this is a common misconception, and I won't necessarily speak to how well this one is enforced. However, I do know the WAC rule is written so that all buoys attached to crab gear, recreational crab gear, have to be half red, half white. That's the way the WAC rule is written.
WAC is Washington Administrative Code.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do get stuck in our acronyms.
Yes, we do.
What do you do with all the recreational pots that were recovered with no owner? Is there a place to purchase them?
That's a good question. Some of the traps, quite honestly, that are recovered are in such poor shape that they're recycled. We do try to get traps back to the owner for those people, and please take note, that have marked their buoys legibly with the full name and address of the person fishing the gear. The state does try to get your gear back to you if we recover it. For everyone else, no. And if your gear is in poor shape, it's going to get recycled. If it's in decent shape, there are a couple partner organizations that we work with, Jefferson County Search and Rescue, Salmon for Soldiers, some of the power squadrons, where we provide some traps that they auction off to fundraise, basically. These are nonprofits. So if you want to check and see if any of these organizations have any pots and when they're doing their auctions, you might have to search up Jefferson County Search and Rescue, Salmon for Soldiers, and the local power squadrons and see if they got any pots from us.
The derelict program that we have it's quite of an extensive undertaking in terms of the man hour to go collect the pots and process them. So it's really unique to Puget Sound, and I don't think that there's another model like it in the country. Because the department is recovering those pots, and a large portion of them, they're either we don't know who to return them to or not. They do either get recycled or donated, as Don said, and the agency itself does not sell them. We can't profit from that, so it's not a source of funds for us. Any one that we donated to is a nonprofit, and ostensibly they can't profit from the sale either. Otherwise, if we don't have a place to submit those for donation, they get recycled as well, even if they're in good shape.
And speaking on that, the Jefferson County Search and Rescue and the Clallam County Search and Rescue. Anybody's out on Peninsula, they're partnering up this weekend for a crab pot sale of those.
Is it this
of some of those
weekend?
pots. Yeah,
Thank you.
and it's this Sunday. It's in a parking lot, so I just have an address. So after this webinar, I will email all the participants. I will email this out to all of you so everybody knows where the sale is happening at this weekend. And one more for you guys, and then one from, well, I'll just go ahead, the one for me. A few people are asking about one, are you guys okay with providing me a copy of this presentation that I can send to participants?
Sure.
Okay, so some of you are asking about the recorded presentation and this presentation. So one, I will get a copy of this and email this out to everybody next week. And also next week, I will email the recorded presentation out to everybody that registered as well. We'll also get it up on our website if you want to get your friends or anybody else on there. And then the one more for you guys before you do your demonstration is, do you think that the 2021 heat dome impacted the Dungeness crab population?
Yes, not just Dungeness crab, but other things as well. Interestingly enough, the year 2015 itself was the record harvest year for Puget Sound Dungeness crab. So what that means is that 2015 itself was a good year for harvest, but not necessarily, I think, a good year for the survival of juvenile or larval Dungeness crab. I think probably the reverse is true, and since 2015, I don't think we've had anything quite near near 12 million pounds of harvest in 2015.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, clearly amongst the different crab species in Puget Sound, there's some research that shows, at least for juvenile and larval Dungeness crab, that they do not like the warmer surface water temperatures. They're less tolerant of that compared to red rock crab and even graceful crab. So yes, I do think it had an impact. I'll let you talk.
Yeah, I agree with Don. I definitely had an impact. Those impacts, they could have been both direct. I mean, Don mentioned a couple examples of direct, the effect of warmer temperatures on the larvae that are up in the water column. I certainly think that the heat did not do them any favors. Dungeness crab, once they become juveniles and they stop swimming around and start crawling, they tend to prefer intertidal habitats as a refuge from their, the predators deeper in the water. So I think that the heat dome probably also negatively impacted the juveniles that were up on the tide flats for those extended heat, very warm days. And then in terms of impacts that might have been less direct than, actively killing them or inhibiting their growth, they're dependent on many things that live in the intertidal for their own food and where they find their prey. And we know from the literature that there was large impacts on clams and other intertidal species, that in the absence of them being there might be less resource for the crab population to feed on over a longer time period, and that could also impact their populations.
Okay. Sorry, one more question before we get to the demonstration is, generally how old is a crab that is keepable size?
Yeah, so there's some variation. A crab at legal size will typically be 3 to 4 years old. There are instances where you will catch crab that are older than that because their growth was diminished. So they didn't molt as many, or they didn't molt they molted more times to get to the size that they were legal to keep. And then there's also instances where conditions were favorable for their growth and they had such a high growth rate that they reached legal size sooner.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those happens. And I would really doubt that you would see a crab that's 2 years old at legal size, but certainly entering its third year would be the youngest. And then we believe that the crab can live, upwards of 6 or 8 years in the wild. And they are certainly keepable at that size as well.
Yeah, in general, male and female Dungeness crab tend to be on the same growth schedule up to about 100 millimeters, roughly 2 years old locally. And then the females grow at a slightly smaller rate, of, at least in terms of carapace width, and the males continue to grow at a steeper rate. So at 2 years, they're at the size where they could mate and reproduce. The females grow less quickly than the males because they're putting so much energy into reproducing egg masses, everything like that. So.
And then the last question we have from Jeff is, but how do I catch more crabs? So I think that's a perfect segue into your demonstration of what we're going to do.
All right. Well, we'll try to set up, Jason, if you can tell us if we're aiming the.
Okay, go ahead and stop sharing your screen. So we're just looking at you guys now.
Oh,
just a second to our listeners. We're going to let them get set up and get a proper camera angle here for us. So if you get back up again, actually that's perfect right there. That's perfect.
Right there? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Again, if you remember the diagram that we showed on the earlier slide, here's your half red and half white buoy. This buoy floats at least 5 pounds of weight. At a minimum, you should have at least one of these for a trap like this. You don't want to put on too many buoys. That can add to drag, and then for lighter pot designs, it will lift your pot off in certain currents. So again, properly labeled, one person's full name and address. You cannot put a boat name on here. You cannot put multiple people's names. If you're going to loan your pot to someone else to fish for a given day, you may want to cover this with like white duct tape and relabel that buoy temporarily for when that person is fishing. Enforcement does not want to see 4 pots deployed out there on the water with the same person's name on it. They won't be able to verify that person's using 2 units of gear per person. They'll assume that person's using 3 or 4. Yeah. You want to make sure that the buoy is attached so that the line doesn't slip through the buoy. That'd be a very easy way to lose your gear. A lot of people will label their lines with the length of the line so they know how much is attached and know where they can fish and where they can't by virtue of the length of the line. This one's 99 feet. This particular line is leaded line. It's a gray look to it with a little bit of colored strand. There's different diameters of this sinking line that you can get. For recreational gear, which tends to be lighter, you don't need anything like 3/8 inch diameter. 1/4 inch to 5/16 leaded line should be perfectly fine for that application, and it reduces your drag in the current when you have a smaller diameter line.
One thing that folks might want to put on their buoy that isn't actually required by rule is a phone number.
Yes.
You're much more likely to get your pot back either from Department of Fish and Wildlife or another fisher if you have a phone number on there. It makes it a lot easier to contact you, but that isn't a requirement. It's just generally a good tip.
Yep. Again, to demonstrate another type of line that you may see attached to some people's gear, this is yellow polypropylene line. It's synthetic. It also floats. So this particular line, if you had a line, this yellow polypropylene attaching your buoy to your trap, you would have to have an external weight attached to the line to be legal to make sure none of it floats at the surface. Currently, that is still a legal arrangement. This particular pot is rigged with a crab pot harness. It's got 4 points of attachment, and it helps bring the pot up on a level keel so that all the crabs stay within the pot, at least until you get it to the surface. The escape, there's 2 different type of escape cord features on this particular pot, and I'll show you. Here's a 4 1/4 inch escape ring. This pot design actually has 3. 1, 2, 3. You have to have at least 2 in the upper half of the pot. And one of these is actually held in with escape cord at the corners. And if that escape cord, if the pot's lost, if this escape cord rots away, that ring will fall out. And as in one of the slides, the crab will be able to negotiate out that corner. Another way that escape cord can close the pot is right here on the bail door hook. In this case, the escape cord is between the hook and the bungee strap. And if this rotted away, this would fall open and the whole side of the trap would fall open and let all the crab out. So that's another way to incorporate escape cord. In case your trap is lost, make sure that those crab can get out. And remember, if a trap is lost and crab are trapped inside, other crab will feed on those crab that are trapped. They're cannibals at all ages. So something to keep in mind. How do crab get into this trap? Well, whether it's a commercial trap or recreational traps, there are different entrances to get it they're one-way entrances to allow the crab to get into the trap. This particular design actually has a little bit of a lip. I don't know if you can see it there, Jason, but there is a little bit of a lip here. So the crab would have to climb over that, get through this gate. It's a one-way gate, and then they would access the bait in the middle of the trap and be trapped. There are 4 gates on this particular design, one on each side. One particular addition that does in some cases help retain catch in the traps is to add weight to these gates. I don't necessarily recommend using lead, but that's what was available on this trap. You can see on this gate, a little bit of weight's been added to that. The reason why that might help is in a current, sometimes these lighter weight gates that don't have a weight would fly open in the current and allow crab to escape. In this case, not so much. That's a weighted gate. It wouldn't fly open in a current.
So that's enough weight for the crab to be able to push it open, but not enough weight for the current to be able to keep that gate up and allow escapement from the pot when it's being actively fished.
One important thing when you're setting up your trap is where you place your bait. Again, there was some list of the baits that you could use. Did we cover that slide? Yeah. There's different baits you can use for crab. A lot of the commercial folks use squid, some kind of oily fish. A lot of the recreational folks, because of its availability, will use chicken or turkey. All of them will work. Daniel might mention some of the advantages of the commercial baits versus the recreational.
Yeah, so in terms of baits, there's typically two different types of baits you have. You have one that fishes for a longer period of time and one that's kind of fast acting. Things that are oily, like salmon or sardines or mackerel, they tend to fish for a longer period of time. They create a big old scent trail that can be followed. They're better for longer soaks. Something like clams or squid, those tend to be more fast acting. And you might get an initial bite, but the bait doesn't last as long. People will commonly put bait out, particularly chicken and turkey, and let it rot. The thought is that the rot will attract the crabs more. What that's doing is it's making more of those fats in the tissues available to kind of create a giant bait plume. I would not recommend doing that. The funk, you can get a bait that has its own oil and scent trail without having to put out rotting bait out into the wild. And remember, you're going to be eating these things, and some people do actually, they'll eat the tamale or the crab butter, and that's going to be in there. And you're also handling it, so that then becomes a vector for foodborne disease. In terms of turkey, chicken, things like that would not normally be part of the crab's diet. We're starting to learn a little bit more that the crab don't actually tolerate those bait well. They don't digest them well. So when that bait is discarded, or any crab are discarded that have eaten it, they actually might have lower survivorship than if you had used something that they would have eaten in their natural environment. like clams or fish or salmon frames or things like that.
One thing important about the bait is where you place the bait. And in this instance, you don't want the bait accessible from a corner, a side, or the top. The reason why is if the crab can access the bait without going through the entrances, they will. So you want to make them come into the trap. So whatever bait you choose to use, try to push it in the center at the bottom of the trap, and that will force them to actually come into the trap and access the bait. I showed two different type of bait containers here. This one is just like a mesh cage that you can open and put your bait in. With slightly wider mesh, this would allow more particulate matter to get out and crab to work at it actively. But it's a rugged cage. Keep in mind that where you place this trap, there will be Dungeness crab and red rock crab. And a lot of the lighter weight mesh bags and stuff don't hold up well to particularly red rock crab. They'll rip them to shreds, rip them off the trap itself and walk away with it. Another type of bait container that's often used, this is a commercial style type cup. This is a large capacity one. You could use this. Oh, I'm sorry. You could use this, but you'd also want to suspend it so that it hangs down from the center of the trap. And you can use clips like this to suspend whatever bait you're going to use from the center of the trap, forcing the crab to go in. Weighting the pot. There's a variety of different crab pot specific weights. I'll put this one back together so I can show you the weight here. This is a particularly light design of a crab pot. So we added these weights. These weights are a bit spendy if you buy them in the sporting goods store, but they're coated with like a rubberized plastic. They can be secured. They can be secured in the center of the pot where they don't interfere with the tunnels or in the corners. This adds a substantial amount of weight to this crab pot design, makes it much less likely to be dragged away from the spot where you placed it, and still fishes just fine. Other options for weighting your trap, as suggested by the slide earlier in the presentation, you can buy bricks. They take up a little bit more space for the same amount of weight with the holes in the middle that can be attached. Try to discourage using lead in a lot of the weighting. You can use PVC filled with sand and sealed. You can use, if you quit working out, you can use these old hand weights that yourself or your wife isn't using anymore. Attach them. We've seen all sorts of interesting things, old tools attached to the bottom of a light trap design. Again, just trying to make the trap heavier and stay put when it's fishing.
How much weight do you recommend putting in a pot, Don?
That's a good question. If I had a commercial style round pot here and I was using that in a recreational fishery, I might not add any weight at all. This particular style of pot, even if you're fishing it in an area with relatively low currents, I would add probably 10 pounds just to be safe. Again, a lot of people are a little reluctant to add weight because if they're pulling by hand, it's all weight that you're going to see again multiple times when they're pulling their pot. If you have a crab pot puller or shrimp pot puller, obviously you're going to be a little less concerned about how much weight to add to your pot.
I think where people tend to go afoul in terms of setting their gear up relative to weight is they tend to add a lot of flotation, either in the form of line or in buoys. And the more flotation you have, the more drag you're getting and the more lift that this pot is going to experience and move. So the weight becomes very important. And if you want to add that second buoy on there, like Don's showing right here, then you really do need to add at least the amount of weight he suggested, if not more. The more flotation that you're adding to add visibility, the more weight you want to have to keep that pot where you put it.
Yeah, this is an example of what we call a high flyer or pole and flag setup. Again, if there's a lot of sport buoys that are set up like this in an area, and you want to be able to distinguish yours from the rest of the malaise that's out there, this is a good way to do it. Add a flag and staff. Again, if you're going to you're gonna do a flag, you want a round side of one of the buoys if you're using two facing the pot, so it's less drag down here, and tight to the top of that. You can put another one there if you feel like you need it. You can customize the pole with different colors of electrical tape bands. You can have flags. Please be tasteful about what flag you put on your buoy. I've seen some that weren't as tasteful, but again, the whole intent of this is just so it makes it stand out from the other buoys and maybe allows you to grab your gear. A lot of people, to make things quickly interchangeable on buoys, they'll put a halibut clip on a short leash on their buoy, whether it be a single buoy or a double, and then you can just clip it quickly and change out buoys if you're fishing in a group and you need to do that. I said that I would show everybody what a ring net looks like, since the question was asked. This is a ring net. The legal definition of a ring net or star trap that separates it from a pot is it has to lay completely flat on the bottom. So when this is fishing, both these rings are lying flat on the bottom. There's not a minimum mesh size requirement on ring nets. Some designs are finer mesh, and this one particularly right here. This one's a Promar one. And sometimes they'll have a harness with a little float just to keep the harness lines up away from it, and it only captures crab when you pull on it. Has to lie flat on the bottom when it's fishing. There's different designs, but this is one that's out there currently.
Yeah, and you'd put weight right here within the center small ring in order to bait it.
Yep. The bait would attach in the center of the small ring. And again, it only has sides when you pull up on it.
Yeah, and there are some styles of what are labeled as ring nets in stores that you can buy that are actually illegal. If they don't lay flat, like Don mentioned, they're not considered a ring net and then a pot, and they would then need escape rings in the side. So there's models that have the entire top open as if they were a ring net, but then the sides are rigid and angled out to a much bigger bottom.
How are we doing on time, Jason?
You're fine. We're at 7:10 right now, but we still have only 3 people have dropped off. We still have pretty much everybody on here. So
okay,
you've got their interest.
I wanted to show you one other style of the folding square crab trap, and this is the one that I showed in one of the last slides. And this one has the top door with the escape cord holding down a top door. This is one design that has a little extra hurdle for crab. Once the rot cord rots away, they have to negotiate the lip and push the door open. That seems to be problematic for escape. One way to make these a little bit more amenable to allowing the crab to escape is to put a bungee at some point here, or to reduce this lip so they don't have to negotiate that to get out. Again, it's slightly different than the one I showed you earlier where the whole side fell down. That one's going to let all the crab out. This one has a little bit more modification that you could do to make it more complete in terms of allowing the crab to be released. I did want to go over some of the material that you would need to take out with you in the field. It's a good idea to take a container for your crab. People sometimes forget, hey, I have to contain these things. Now I've got them. What do I put them in? Some people would use ice chests or buckets. It's a good thing not to submerge, let's say, a limit of crab on a summer day in a bucket of standing water or in a cooler of water. They'll quickly use up all the oxygen in there and you'll have a bunch of dead crab. A lot of the commercial guys, the way they handle their live crab is they'll have basically a garbage can and they'll use wet seawater soaked burlap. They'll put their live crab not underwater, but under that seawater soaked burlap. If you're a recreational fisher, you could use a seawater soaked towel and some cold packs, and your crab will survive much better in those conditions, and you'll get them home and you'll have fresh crab for your dinner. So just be aware, if you don't have an air bubbler and everything else, try and store crab in water, do it with a seawater soaked towel burlap. something like that.
Yeah, I would recommend not putting them directly on ice, having a layer of terry cloth or burlap between the ice and the crab. And then if the top of a container is open to the environment, then having burlap or terry cloth on top of that, that's also wet.
Different gauges, commercially, this is the kind of gauge. This one only has the 6 1/4 inch measure. It's metal, won't break. Well, it will break if you really beat up on it, but that's what we use for our work. There are some other metal gauges that people have made that have not only the 6 1/4 inch, but also the 5 inch for red rock. They're pretty rare. But you can get combo gauges like that. Most people probably have seen these plastic versions of the 6 1/4 inch gauge. This one actually has 3 notches, 5 3/4 for Oregon, Columbia River, 6 inch for the coast, and 6 1/4 inch for Puget Sound. Be sure you're using the right measure of those notches for these combo gauges. They are plastic, they do break, just be aware of that. But these are the ones you commonly see in the field. Again, to measure a crab, I'll use this shell as an example. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, we can see everything fine.
We'll move it up so you can see.
Perfect.
This is a Dungeness crab shell. This is the way you would use the gauge right in front of those last set of points. It has to be minimum 6 1/4 inches. That's the last notch on this gauge. And you can see this one is bigger than that 6 1/4 inch. This would be legal to keep if it was male and hard shell. That was more of an average size crab. Again, this is what a jumbo would look like. Again, 6 1/4 inch. Clearly, that's more than legal size. You'd be able to keep that. Similarly, here's a red rock crab. You would use the 5 inch measure on this particular gauge ahead of the last set of points. And again, this red rock crab is easily more than 5 inches, would be legal to keep, whether it be male or female. This one shell that I managed to break when it's clearly not legal size, 5 inches for red rock crab, and you wouldn't be able to keep that. You want to have a gauge. It'd be a good idea to have the current edition of the Washington Sport Fishing Rules pamphlet with you. If nothing else, to impress the enforcement officer that you meet that day. We also have a crab brochure that's been recently updated that's on the WDFW website as a downloadable brochure. We are also equipping our field staff and enforcement and cooperating partners like Northwest Straits Marine Resource Committees with this brochure, and it has all the information about that we talked about today. Maybe not in as much detail, but how to measure legal size, how to report lost gear, how to cook your catch, how to keep it alive, and how to set up your gear. So these are all good things to take with you while you're out in the field. And make sure you have your catch record card for Dungeness crab and a pen to record your catch immediately. And Daniel, is there anything else you want to include on a gear demonstration?
I don't think so. I think we did a good job done. Are there
Any other questions related to gear?
Yeah, real quick, a couple. If one listener says, if I crab from a kayak, can I paddle the full crab trap to shore, then go through the crab, or does it have to be done where the trap is pulled up?
Oh, I see. You know, our enforcement, they interpret the rule as they've told me that you should record your catch before you deploy the trap again. So they didn't really explain to me if there would be an exception for someone like in a kayak or a paddleboard. We actually know people who crab from paddleboards. Seems to be more and more common. The general rule is for enforcement, you need to record your catch if it's safe to do so before you put your pot back in the water. So I know for a fact that they will watch people. If they pull a trap up, they get on board, they're sorting the crab, they keep one, they put it in a bucket, and they just throw the trap back in without recording their catch, they might come and talk to you.
And Don, I get a lot of questions about knots, like the proper knot to tie to your harness and to your buoy. Do you have some knots that you could recommend these people?
Daniel, do you have some preferred knots for tying gear? I know I use the Bolden a lot. Maybe it's just because I was a Boy Scout and that's the one they taught me. And a Bolden knot is a knot that doesn't slip. And so I use that for a lot of my connections. These knots here are basically a variation of the Bolden just to make a stopper knot so that this buoy does not slide off this line. It started with a Bolden and I added some extra loops. There's probably more resources on a variety of knots that I can't really go into here for the presentation, but my favorite for just generally attaching things, it's a Bolden knot.
Yeah, for attaching the pot to the line, a Bolen's a great one, particularly to like the bridle. For the stopper knots up here, a figure 8 knot, it's a really simple one, and it would work for both stops on this side. In terms of a resource where you can find some good knots and how to tie them, animatedknots.com. They both a YouTube channel and a website, and they show you each step in a live demonstration that you can pause and whatever. They're great for knots.
One caution about harnesses like these that we have seen, some of these harnesses have hooks that are plastic or rubberized plastic. They may get brittle over time and break. So I personally prefer tying directly my own knot and not having plastic hooks, but you know, they'll last a while, but just beware with some exposure to sunshine and seawater, they become brittle.
Yeah, even the metal ones wear over time. I was just going through my gear and I got a harness that I'm gonna replace because I don't trust that metal anymore. Yeah, with that too, I'm kind of with you guys on those knots as well. Something I like to do as well is I like to take electrical tape and just wrap it around the knot. It's just an extra measure, especially if there's any tag line as well. But that's another thing you do to kind of shore it up. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions. So I think that pretty much everybody is still on. So I think that must have mean you covered it pretty well for everybody.
Well, thank you for staying tuned, people. I know it's Friday and it's a nice weather outside. So thank you for your attention.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Well, thanks, Daniel and Don. I think this is year 3 or 4 that we've done this. I think it's super valuable. And I know everybody on here, and certainly I am, we're ready to get out there, depending on where you're at. But next Saturday, it's time to get out.
Well, good luck to everyone out there, and hopefully the weather holds like it did today.
Yeah. Okay. Have a good weekend. Thanks again, guys. And thank you, everybody out there.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.